Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. Now, Jesus, as he was leaving the temple, one of the disciples said unto him, Master, seest what manner of stones and what buildings are here? Jesus answered and said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And when he was sat down on the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Simon Peter, James, and John came unto him privately, saying, Master, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, and the fulfillment of these things? Jesus answered and began to say unto them, Take heed lest any man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So here we see, a transition from him having just addressed certain issues in the temple. This really is shown by, this scripture here that, they're marveling, at the splendor of the buildings and of the landmarks, looking at, the beauty of things. Jesus understanding the fulfillment of all things, showing them what is to come to these very buildings. We see him transition into the Mount of Olives and them asking for a sign, for the end of things and the thing that he just told them. All right, so we see him here leaving the temple, and as he left the temple, he just got done dealing with two very delicate issues. The first one was, the parable of, the scribes came unto him. He just addressed that scribe that asked him, "What is the greatest commandment of all?" He told him to love the Lord thy God with all thy mind, soul, heart, and strength, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. He gave a wonderful answer. He's saying that all these things are greater than whole burnt offering and sacrifices. Jesus beheld him, say, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." So, the scribes right now they are in such error. He gave them as a rebuke. I already did that video to let them know that these guys they're in huge trouble. You might be one of them that's lucky, that's on the right path, but the rest of them are not. So that he followed up saying, this was directed at the scribes. How say the scribes that Christ is the son of David? And David said unto him, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand till I make thy enemies thy footstool. If David himself called him Lord, how can he be David's son? How can he call his own son Lord? So that was one of the things he just dealt with in the temple. The other one was how they cast into the treasure, beheld in as the rich man cast in much, and how they did it, the spirit that was on them, how they did it so boastfully, and they were showing off, and they were just of the wrong heart. But then this poor widow came and cast in too much to make a farthing. He said she has cast in more than all day. So he just dealt with those two things. And like I said before that, it was the scribe that asked the question, what is the greatest commandment of all? Before that we saw him dealing with the Sadducees concerning the resurrection, the seven brothers that had that one wife, each one dying, leaving her to the next. Whose wife shall she be in the resurrection? And before that, we saw the question from the Herodians and the Pharisees: Is it lawful to pay tribute to Caesar or not? And then before that, it was a parable of the vineyard. The man that planted a vineyard went to a far country and sent his servants to receive of the fruit of the vineyard, but they kept killing them. So we pick up here. So he's leaving the temple. And like I said, he just done address these two things, which was, the Lord said unto my Lord, how can how can Jesus be David? How can the Christ really David's son if David himself called him Lord? How can he call his own son Lord? And then, this poor widow had casted more than all these rich men. So we see him leaving here, and, one of the disciples really pointed out, the grandiosity of the buildings and how things look. Remember when they came out of Egypt, they lived in tents. They walked around. They were supposed to go to the promised land, but then when Moses sent the spies, they went and they saw giants in the land, and they came and they gave a bad report saying that they are giants and there's no way we can defeat them. And the Lord, he was upset with them and promised that they would not go, but their children would. So he had them wander the wilderness for 40 years until they were all, dead. That, was a part of that generation. So this whole time they lived in tents. Then after the 40 years, they began to take possession. They would displace the inhabitants, in battle, and they take over the land. And it was David that had in his heart to build a house unto the Lord, because at that time, even the Ark of the Covenant is still abode in tents. So we've come a long way, really. So they're admiring, even the place that they worship in, the temple. Wow. They were admiring not only the building itself, but even the stones, the type of stones that were used to make it. What manner of stones and what great buildings are there. So, they were enjoying the greatest architecture that that time had to offer. Pretty sure that many of these buildings, they might still be standing. Some of them might be stable enough for people to conduct business there, or whatever purpose it might serve. Some of them might just be monuments that you observe. Even the high priest, he had a palace at this point. When Jesus was taken, when they came and got him in the Garden of Gethsemane after Judas betrayed him, he was taken to the palace of the high priest. So we've come, really far as a people. Israel. What they were able to build in those days is nothing compared to what we are able to build today. Obviously, with the technology, I mean, if you look at the World Trade Center, Trump Towers, the Taj Mahal, those buildings that like you see in Russia, we've come so far in technology, in construction. So, as they're admiring this, Jesus, he points out to them how, these things, they shall be destroyed. That in the turn of events that shall happen, that, this is one of the consequences of them, rejecting the Messiah. He said, if you only knew the things which were for your peace, when they rejected them, but now these things are hid from you. And it just goes to show you the irony of life sometimes. God, he knows the beginning from the end from the beginning. And could be at a point in your life where things take a sudden turn for the worse or for the better. It would be so wrong to say things can only get worse, right? But usually the thing that we fear is something that's sudden, and is that it gets worse. Nobody's gonna complain if it gets better. So looking upon these things and how they were so cherished, you would think that them being so cherished, they would be protected, and measures would be there to prevent these things from happening. But Jesus, he gives them answer, showing them how, as precious as these things are to you guys, a time is coming very shortly where these things they shall be thrown down by the invading armies. We see him, going also to the Mount of Olives, sitting over against the temple, and his top three, Peter, James, and John. But we see Andrew coming here, and like I always say, Andrew, he met four of them the same day. Simon Peter and Andrew first, and then James and John, in the boat with their father and their met. Simon Peter and Andrew were by themselves. And if you notice, like Andrew, he's always left out. When he went to heal Jairus' daughter, the ruler of the synagogue, my daughter lieth at home sick to the point of death. The damsel is not dead but sleepeth, and they laughed him to scorn. It was only Peter, James, and John. Andrew was not there. When he took them up on the mountain to be transfigured, it was Peter, James, and John. Andrew was not there. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was taken, he left the other, because remember, Judas, he was gone to betray him. So there was 11 of them there. So he left the other 8 on the outskirts, and he took Peter, James, and John. So here we see Andrew coming also, trying to be a part of the in crowd. I did a video, mentioning how, make sure that you're a part of the in crowd and that you are an asset, and that, you're not so easily left out, that business can be conducted without you. But be an asset, be part of the backbone of the thing. So we see them asking really for, a sign. When shall these things happen? When shall these things be? Because, they're asking really, a lot of things here. It's not just the destruction of this, building, but, when shall, the end of the world? I know you're here to do a work, to save men's soul, but there is coming a judgment. There is coming Armageddon. There's coming certain things that, God in his spirit had, deemed, ever since Lucifer rebelled, and it's ever since Lucifer rebelled in heaven. That's when these things came. What happened in the Garden of Eden was just a consequence of what he did. All these things are written, and we're waiting on them, and they're asking for clues and signs. How do we know when we're close to it? How do we know when it's time to really prick up our ears and be on guard? How do we know when it's time really, and that we should be getting our battle gear on, expecting things to change anytime soon? So this is really a two-part video, because this is the first half of this, scripture here. And he starts out with the most important one. Many shall take heed that no man deceive you. It's a dangerous thing to not be in covenant and relationship with God. It's a dangerous thing to not be led by God. It's a dangerous thing to not be fasting. When they brought that, all right, so when he was up being transfigured, and the rest of the disciples were down, because remember, he took them up into a mountain. It was Peter, James, and John. So the rest of them were down, on the flatlands, the lowland, and they brought, this demon-possessed boy, deaf and dumb spirit, right? And they couldn't cast it out. Ultimately, Jesus gave them the answer when they asked, why couldn't we cast it out? He said, because this kind goes out only by prayer or by fasting. So if the disciples, 12 apostles, walking with Jesus in a non-fasting, were unable to be effective, and they actually walked with him, right? Then how much more us? We have people that's living this life, and I mean, it takes so much to survive, right? It takes so much to walk straight, to be in the faith. It takes so much, so much sacrifice, so much self-denial, so much, changing your internal thoughts, that, we have all these people walking this earth. And I say the non-fasting, non-praying person is wide open. There's no telling what you're going to get. Because deception, it manifests in so many different ways. It would be easy to stand right here and tell you that it's only one way or a couple ways. Deception manifests itself in so many different ways. There's all the way ridiculous. There's in the middle ridiculous. There's slightly ridiculous. But at the end of the day, all of them are going to leave you in a bad place. A place that you don't want to be. So take heed lest any man deceive you. Because, people, they're going to come with their ideals, try to force that on you. Often when I'm talking to myself, reasoning, uncovering the secrets of life. I always ask myself, why is it that when people they discover something, they want everybody else to follow it? And if it's so great, why can't you just follow it and you believe in it? And a lot of these things, people try to lead people astray, and they're doing the best that they can, operating as strong as they believe that they are operating. But like I said, the mind that's not being guided by God, the mind that's not fasting, that's not purposefully, building itself, that's not structuring, that mind is open to fall in so many different ways. And that's the thing about it, because there's so many different ways to fall. Sometimes I saw a certain person, they could never fall by A, B, and C. Not even D, E, and F. But guess what? G is the one thing that they will be susceptible to. You see, because it's not just one thing, not just A, not even A, B, and C. This person might float around and be okay until they run up into G. If you understand what I'm trying to say. Take heed lest any man deceive you. Because there's many deceptive spirits gone out into the world. It's 1/3 of God's angels that fell. 1/3. One legion alone is 12,000. What is deception? Deception is having you walking in something that's not the truth, and yet still you receive it as if it was. Some deceptions are handed down, generation after generation. The Jews themselves this day confess that Jesus is not the Christ. How do you walk away from something like that when your mommy and daddy, when you were little, started instilling this in you? Watch out for this guy, Jesus. He's a deceiver. He came and he tricked the people. He told all kind of lies that he's the son of God. He died and his disciples came and stole the body away. He tried to trick us that he was casting out, devils, but he was a devil, casting out his own devils. Some deceptions, they're handed down from generation to generation. Some families, the spirit of divinity, it takes hold of them. Grandma was a witch, ma is a witch, the daughter is a witch, her daughter is a witch. And they all commune with these spirits, certain lifestyles. You observe your parents have open marriages and swinging. It's called swinging, right? Where they are allowed to, have intercourse with other people, sexual intercourse, and both of them are fine with it. But this leads, where this leads. It doesn't matter how much you agree to it. What bad values, the values also can be corrupted. So take heed lest no man deceive you. And he gives the real reason after that. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So now, if you check the internet, you'll see literally people showing up saying that they are the Christ. I saw this one guy, he was Australian. He's describing scenes from the crucifixion, telling us that that was him. I always see flyers here in New York, where I live. There's this one guy, he calls himself literally the Messiah, and he is Jewish. You'll see his posters all over, especially the crossing signs, when you're crossing the street. Messiah is here. He calls himself the Messiah. People officially, coming out claiming to be the Messiah. This is one aspect of it. But this is so simple. The devil, he's been operating for thousands of years, if not millions. Dinosaur fossils are real. How long has he been here? In the beginning, he was kicked out, but then he can only start deceive. Well, he did deceive the angels first, right? But then he couldn't start deceiving human beings until they were created, because there's no way you can deceive them when they're not even created, right? So if you think about just how cunning and how deceptive and trickery this devil, how he is, then you would understand that these are not. Keep an eye out for these things. It is one of them, but these are not the things that you look out for. Many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. It's not them literally saying that they are the Christ, and that's too easy to spot. That's too easy to get your guard up. That's too easy to be on the lookout, and that's too easy to trip your tripwires. Soldiers, when they're camping, they set up tripwires sometimes around the camp. So if any enemy is approaching and they touch one of these wires, it'll set off some sort of signal, either an explosion or some flares that fly up into the sky, to let them know that the enemy is trying to infiltrate the camp. The deception that I am the Christ that you need to worry about, is the doctrine. I would say it's what they teach. Trying to pull the people to themselves. People claiming that they have some new secret revelation from God. They're not saying that they're the Christ. They're coming, with this thing to lead you astray. They themselves might even genuinely believe it. Where it's not like they're being deceptive. They really believe this thing. I once heard a speaker say that anybody that drags you away from what God has told you, and they are coming telling you, something else, that makes them a false Christ. People, playing according to common the today's agenda. We have the LGBTQ, infiltrating, the Church of God. People making way for something like this. That's one. Let no man deceive you by any means. Not because your leader is saying that it's okay, means that it's okay. I always say it's good to be able to evaluate things. What does the Bible say concerning that? Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Study to show thyself approved, a workman unto God who needed not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. There's an understanding for yourself. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were in Babylon. They came up with this law. Whenever you hear the music, you gotta bow down and worship. They said we refuse to bow. What is the music that's being played today? LGBTQ, that's one of the music. When you hear the music, bow down and worship. Just the direction of where modern society has taken us. Certain activities, certain locations, certain places that are breeding grounds really for the devil and his boys. That you shouldn't really be finding yourself frequenting these places. Nightclubs, any place where there's a lot of alcohol. It's called spirits for a reason. Literally, alcohol, another name for it is spirits. I know certain faiths that they believe it's okay to, sleep with each other's wives, to exchange wives, for the evening. That's a no. You haven't gotten this, revelation from God that it's okay. And then you come and tell people, take heed lest any man deceive you. How do you take heed? You got to know it for yourself. Because your very leader might be the one leading you astray. I saw a video of this, prominent pastor that somebody, while they were having church, somebody stood up and started to speak. And they said that they have a message from God that, this leader, he's leading people astray, to hell. She called it idolatry. And all the people were like, well, there's a time and place for that. You got to follow decorum. And by all means, well, remember, anytime Jesus, when he taught in the temple, he was not a chief priest, elder, or a scribe. And that's why they would come at him so hard. Because he did not, officially, through the official channels, he was not ordained by them. And, he wasn't one of them. So one can argue that maybe he didn't have permission to be there. There were many mixed, reactions to what she did. Now, I said, what if she is right? What if she is actually right? What if this was truly from God? Can you see how this ruler would be protected even while leading these people to hell? Can you see how he would be protected from being challenged, from hearing a true word from God? Not saying that she was right, not saying she wasn't right. But you got to look at the bottom line. And that's the most, I always encourage people to look at the bottom line and see what's the worst, see what's the floor. Because, if she's wrong, hey, then, we go about our business, right? Her being wrong is not going to hurt anyone. But if she is right, and God, he does have this feeling about this, then we have a pastor leading people to hell. And there's nothing anybody can do or say about it. Study to show yourself approved, rightly dividing the word of truth. Remember, ultimately, it's God that is your shepherd. This pastor, he's just an overseer. He's just a helper, really. And, I would encourage you to have the kind of relationship with God where, if that's the issue, then you're one that he can come and tell directly. He can speak to you, or you have that kind of relationship with him where even if he doesn't speak directly, he has some means to get the answer to you. Whether it be a random person on the street, a video that you will see on YouTube, or whatever it will take, he'll get it to you. I encourage you to have that kind of relationship with him. Like I see right now, we're dealing with Peter, James, John, and Andrew. What about the other 8? Strive to be a part of this in crowd. All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, Jesus, as he was leaving the temple, one of the disciples said unto him, Master, beholdest thou what manner of stones these are, and what buildings are here? So like I said, we're just leaving the temple after having, dealt with these 2 questions. So you know that not everything will be recorded, right? And when he's there's smaller issues that would be addressed. There would be issues that are already addressed in other places. These people that weren't there, I know he has to give them the same answer. There's other things that are just left out, just for content's sake. Maybe they were addressed in another book somewhere else or in another location. So it really was, like I said, the riddle. How can David call him Lord when the Christ is his son? How can he call his son Lord? The next one was concerning the treasury. Looking how the rich man cast into the treasury versus the poor, old lady that cast in 2 mites, which make a farthing. So, after having set the record straight, that's exactly what he did. We can speculate how we think things should be, or guess how we think that they are. But, only he can tell you, like, this is how it is. It's not that. And a lot of these things, they're counterintuitive. They work the opposite the way that you think that it should. He said, give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together. It's opposite to what you think it will work, right? For you to hold on to what you have and then just go around collecting, and that's how you have much. But now he says, give and you shall be given much. And there's many other things in, the Bible and his doctrine that show you counterintuitive things like these. So we see them here, beholding, really marveling at how far they've come. So, you can imagine that these stones, they were in this building, it was different from where they lived. Like the houses were made maybe of, simpler, materials. So it's like, really, it's really just, being out and about, admiring, things. We just got done, with business for the day in the temple. We just, we're just sightseeing and we're just out, and they're showing him, the beauty of things. We know he already spoke to them about, it's not the gold on the altar, but rather it's the altar that sanctifieth the gold. It's not the things that are on the outside, but the things that are within. He already dealt with them concerning the scribes and Pharisees who love to, devour widows' houses. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the border of their garment. They love the upper rooms at feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues. They love to be called rabbi of men. Them admiring this building. I mean, they're allowed to admire the building, right? They're allowed to say, how beautiful it is. Look at the materials. These materials, they actually came from, Warsaw or wherever it might be. Because remember, David, when he was building the house of the Lord, he got cedar trees from, I forget, where it was. They were shipped to him, by the river. These trees, they did not come from Israel. So I imagine that maybe these bricks to build this, this temple, it also, did not come, from Israel. So they really were just, observing, just having a good time, But then, Jesus, he, began to show them, secrets. He said, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things. I will utter things that have been kept secret since the foundation of the world. So the next one we see, it says, Jesus answered and said unto him, see these great buildings. There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So, things change. Things in life change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Like I said in one of my videos, you can see a house that a family has lived in there, for generations and how everything is set up. And then, something happens. Either the family, they move to somewhere better or somewhere worse. And then, this house has to be vacated and it's not empty. And you look at it and comparing it to what it looked like. It's just the change in things. So they were looking at this building thinking that it would stand forever. They were looking at this building, knowing that, these people were people of faith. And this was the house of the Lord. And you expect the house of the Lord to be protected and defended. But, like I said, he already showed them how, they rejected him. So, whatever happens, it's going to be a consequence of the choices and the decisions that you guys made. But, at the same time, he did come, to give his life as a ransom for us. So you see, because, they mentioned what manner of stones are here. So he said, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. There's a parable of this rich man that his ground, his crops brought forth plenty in 1 year. He didn't even have enough room in his barns to store them. He said, I know what I shall do. I shall, tear down these barns and build bigger barns so that I may drink and eat and be merry for many years. But that, night the Lord said, thou fool, thou knowest not that this very night thy soul shall be required of thee. This really, it, emphasizes and shows you the abruptness of change. And it doesn't matter what things look like. They can change in any moment for the, like I said, for the good or for the worse. It's good to, focus on both things. Because, if you're walking with God, you're doing everything that he's asking you to. You're walking with God and he's doing everything that you're asking him to. I mean, I could see how he could lead you into greener pastures. Things will get better, right? But, Moses, he was a leader of the children of Israel. He got frustrated for 10 seconds. He let his frustration get the best of him for 10 seconds. He didn't get to see the promised land because of that. Joshua was the one that took them into the promised land. Things can change at any moment. And even though right here is, showing the negative aspect, because you're marveling at all these things. You're looking at these things and thinking that they're permanent. Set not your eyes on these things, but set your eyes on me. I am permanent, said the Lord. Alright, so the next one says, as he sat down on the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter, James, and John and Andrew came unto him privately. So they changed, location. The Mount of Olives, I believe, is close to where the Garden of Gethsemane is, where he was taken when they came for him. And this is why Judas knew where to come and find him. It said that because he had often resorted to this place with his disciples. So this is like a frequent spot for them. So now they're coming asking answer, which they often do for any parable. Every parable that he ever spoke, they would always come unto him. And in private, he would, expound onto them. So it was noted to say that he sat down on the Mount of Olives over against the temple. So that it was close by. The temple was, within view. You can imagine. So they come by asking him, these four. I guess, Andrew, he's getting the insight that he's been left out of the important missions, call them that. And he's trying to show more interest. He's trying to be included more. As we will see that Garden gets so many time when he's taken, Andrew, will be on the outskirts with the other disciples. So they're coming to ask him of this thing that he just told them. That, you guys are marveling at these things, but they're all about to be destroyed. Which just goes to show you that it's only, we brought nothing. Job said we brought nothing into the world and we shall take nothing. It's only your relationship with God that you can get to take. Because you either leave this world with God or you leave without him. Alright, so then the next one says, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of the fulfillment of these things? So ultimately, they'll take as much as he can give them, as he's willing to give them. But he said that if no man, not even the Son, not even the angels in heaven, but the Father only. Can you imagine if Jesus was to give them a final date? This would give so many people so much excuse. Let's say that, the final day was, in December the 18th of 2026. Imagine if he was to come and tell everyone that. Then, everybody would live their life or however they wanted. But then, you would still have loyal people who would follow him, right? But then, when that date was getting closer, then the people would start to come in, right? But then even then, if he was to give you a date, you don't know what day you shall die. There's many that die young, there's many that die old. There's no way for you to predict the day when your number shall be called. So really, they're asking for as much as they can get. We know that there was an invasion of Jerusalem when the temple it was destroyed. So when they say when, they really are looking for a date, like what month, what year, what day. And then they also said, what shall be the signs? What are we looking for? What's going on in the land? What's going on amongst the people? What's going on in the government? What's going on, among the religious leaders? What, trends are going on in that day? What are the people up to? What are the things that we're focused on in our society? How are the people? Asking for a sign. Is there going to be a specific event, a natural disaster, I don't know, the rising of a certain person? Anything in nature, earthquakes, the moon turning into blood, as we know. Book of Joel, it said. So not only a date, but what are the signs that we should be looking for? Because he told us, told them, let no man deceive you. So what are the signs that when we see, we shall know that no man can come and really pull the wool over our eyes. For we see this happen, we see that happen. Then the next one says, then he answered and said unto them, take heed lest no man deceive you by any means. Kind of like what he told them in the Garden of Gethsemane. Watch and pray, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. We walk in the spirit, but we are of the flesh. We are flesh, which means that there's a battle. And at any moment in time, we could be walking in more of the spirit. At another time, we could be walking in more of the flesh. Some of these things, they'll sound good when we see them. And we'll gravitate towards them when they might be completely wrong. Take heed. Walk. He said, be harmless as doves, but wise as serpents. Don't let your opinion be dictated by what somebody else says. If somebody else has something to say, you consider it. But then you use sound reasoning, use sound judgment. You pray unto God. You ask for answers. No man, I see a lot of leaders, they want a direct pen to write into their followers' heart. They want a direct pen that they can just come and write directly, telling them what they should believe, what they should receive. When the truth is, you're putting pieces of this puzzle together. And I think that's something that we fail to, receive as believers. Is that, even our leaders, these books, they are all, just tools that we use to put final picture together ourselves. Don't be lazy. A lot of too many people have gotten themselves in trouble being lazy. But I see too many leaders wanting to access to write directly on their followers' heart. Some of them even want it to the point where they'll come back later and say, okay, I wrote this. All right, erase that and write this instead. All right, so the last one says, for many shall come in my name saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So like I said, there's literal coming saying that they are Christ. These ones, it's easier. These ones, they deceive less people. Even though they do deceive, I've seen whole churches be packed to these, people saying that they're Christ, but on a grand scale of things, these are not going to be the great deceivers. The great deceivers, they're more subtle. They're not going to show up saying that they're Christ. They're going to show up and they're going to, look like the real thing. Then you'll notice small things here and there. Because the devil, he doesn't need you to be fully, deceived. He just needs a little bit. Then he'll use that as an opening to bring in, the things that's going to get you really, God's back turned to you on that day. That's what his goal is, to get God to turn his back on you. Say, I never knew you. One of the parables, they answered and said, did we not prophesy in thy streets? Did we not cast out devils? And they listed all these things. And he said, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. You see, that's because, he did it. He did enough to get them in trouble. The devil, he did enough to get them in trouble. As much as they were still, prophesying and preaching and casting out devils and doing all these things, many and shall deceive many. These are the subtle ones. Yeah, these are the ones that come and say, how can we be so judgmental? Do you not know that God loves the LGBTQ? Yeah, he does. But he said, come as you are, not stay as you are. Come as you are and I change you. I am Straw Greenhorn.